Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here to listen about this panel and this session, which of course is a key one. I hope you will be interested. I mean, this session is about bridging the global challenges of food security and climate change. And as such, we are in the bucket one, which is protecting the planet and its people. I think this end is absolutely key because no country can be asked to choose between climate and development. If I may say so, there is no saving the planet to the expense of its people. So one of our key issues is how can we reconcile both? But I would say that we could also be in the bucket 3, which is about addressing inequalities and accelerating SDGs, because growing in food insecurity is indeed a key factor of growing inequalities. And to put it the other way around, without food security, there is no health, no education, no development, no way that we will be able to achieve the SDGs or African Union Agenda 2063 goals. And I would say that we could also feature in bucket 4, which is crafting peace and building a safer world, because the link between food insecurity and conflict is obvious in both ways. One, it's because when you have conflicts, you have more food insecurity, more refugees, more IDPs, but food insecurity is also a key factor, a key trigger to more and more conflict. So this is saying that we need to break the ability or the habit we've had to work in silos, and we must bridge all components. We must also, of course, work short-term, but also long-term. To talk about all this, we are 3 wonderful panelists, which I will very briefly introduce. We have Pedro Manuel Moreno, who is Deputy Secretary General of UN Conference on Trade and Development. Pedro has more than 20 years working in multilateral fora, both in UN and in regional intergovernmental organizations, and what's important, both in the field and at UN headquarters, where I spent quite some time at UNDP. Valerie Garniering is Assistant Executive Director for Program and Policy Development at World Food Programme. She has an immense experience also of working in the field. And before joining World Food Programme, she worked in the US government at the National Security Council, so she knows about the link with crisis and conflict, and at USAID, the US Agency for International Development. And now Hanan Monshin, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer for OCP, Office Chérifien des Phosphates. Hanan is also an engineer, a chemical engineer, so she too knows a lot about what it takes to make progress when it comes to food security and how this can contribute to better and more sustainable development. So thank you very much to all of us to be there. And if you allow me, I will begin with you, Valerie. How would you describe the current situation of food insecurity? Is it business as usual, or do you see more concerning trends, more specific emergency situations? And if you can elaborate a bit further, I mean, what for you are the main root causes of this food insecurity? What are the main challenges? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Unfortunately, business is booming. We're seeing needs growing exponentially with record levels of acute hunger around the world, 332 million people facing acute hunger, and this is 180 million more people than before the COVID pandemic. We're also seeing high levels of acute malnutrition, 45 million people facing acute malnutrition, and this can be a matter of life or death, particularly for children. And forced displacement is at record levels, with more than 100 million people forcibly displaced this year. So certainly a very difficult situation. We're also seeing three trends that interact to make it a particularly challenging circumstance. One is there's a real increased complexity in the crises. We know that the hunger is being driven by increased conflict, by climate change, and also by economic shocks. But it's how these factors also interact with each other to create a polycrisis that is really putting at-risk populations even more vulnerable. And you can see that in a context like Sudan, where 5 million people forcibly displaced due to violence this year comes on top of decades of drought, instability, and climate shocks. So this is really a very volatile combination indeed. Another trend that is quite challenging is really this trend of reduced humanitarian space. Civilians, and ensuring that civilians are protected in war and have access to basic services, including services provided by neutral and impartial humanitarian actors. And clearly, the situation in Gaza is a very striking example of that situation now. So too is Sudan again, and the situation in Ukraine. And then last, I would want to highlight that against this volatile cocktail of polycrises, we're also seeing reduced financial support. Last year, we received record levels of support, $14 billion, generous contribution from member states and other donors around the world. But even that wasn't enough to meet the growing need. And now what we're seeing is a sharp decrease in support for the international humanitarian system. And you take a context like Afghanistan, where we have had to scale back massively food assistance and don't even have the support that we would need to ensure that 7 million women, widows, disabled populations in desperate need of support get the support that they need. So clearly, more political and more financial support is needed for humanitarian work, while we also look at how we link support to address short-term needs with investments in building resilience and addressing some of these root causes.
Thank you very much, Valerie. I mean, I think this last point is very important. We can see the need for more financial resources, but it's probably also a question of where do we put the resources in order maybe to lessen the financial needs of addressing emergencies. We need to build more resilient systems so that we have less emergency needs to deal with. It will be less costly, probably, or a better investment of resources. And also I get your point, your key point on the polycrisis landscape and the interaction, the growing interaction between multiple crises. Thank you very much. Pedro, last October in Abu Dhabi, UNCTAD held its World Investment Forum, and there was an important high-level session about agri-food systems, and more specifically on the need to amend, to reform, to transform the agri-food systems. Could you tell us a bit more about the key takeaways of this summit? Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. As you know, the World Investment Forum is the biggest investment forum in the world, bringing together the developing countries and the donors, including policymakers, heads of states, ministers, regulators, trade negotiators, etc. So there is a very good space to, discuss and bridge the different areas of the investment community. And this year we had a special track with the FAO on agri-food systems and investment. And the forum happened in a moment where, first of all, 15% of the SDGs are not on track. Only 15% are on track. And second, the SDG investment gap has widened from $2.5 trillion in 2015 to $4 trillion now. So it's actually wider. So with this in mind, we try to be as bold as possible, make a call of action, and try to make the investments go to the sectors that are going to be contributing to sustainability of the policies, and also to the countries and to the places in the world where it is needed the most. The two main outcomes in terms of policy recommendations were a call of action and also a set of principles for responsible agricultural investment. This call for action, very briefly, was mainly consisting of 4 points. One, the need to repurpose the existing fiscal outlays in the agricultural sector towards increasing sustainability and productivity instead of just consumption outlays. The second, a very strong call, jointly with ministers and heads of state, for multi-stakeholders engagement to mobilize additional financial resources and also use innovative financial mechanisms such as blended finance to de-risk agricultural investments and make these more attractive to global investors, right? Because we are having also a gap there. The third one was regarding urban agri-food systems, the need to speed up the transformation and the investment, including through increased cooperation between local and national governments in developing and implementing food safety and security policies where they are not. And the last one, making a very urgent call to upgrade rural market facilities, such as improving cold storage facilities, deploying climate-smart processing, storage and packaging, and utilizing handling technologies to reduce food loss and food waste. I will leave it there for the moment. We have many more things to do, but
yeah, but
to say,
we'll
but
come
I
back
will leave
to
it.
yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pedro. One point I think which says a lot is the fact that this was an investment forum, and I think that investing in agriculture, rather than just taking care of the immediate needs, is certainly something that's absolutely key. To see agriculture as a business case. And if I can come to you, Anand, you heard about investing, about innovation, about what can you say? I know that at OCP you are at the forefront of leading the way here. I know also that you are a chemical engineer, so you know what you are talking about. So if you can just to begin with, tell us what are the key levers that we would need to address to shift towards sustainable models of agriculture, or a model that's not incompatible with climate. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say that I'm very delighted to be part of this panel and this discussion. So to try to address your question, I think we need to figure out that all the future scenarios are aligning on two main facts. The first one is that the world global population is growing, and then this population will definitely need more food. So the increase of food production is a fatality, something that we cannot deal without. And the second point is that if we keep running agriculture as we are doing now, we will definitely enhance and deepen again the climate crisis, because we will generate more carbon and we need carbon emissions, and definitely we need to deforest more lands, etc., to produce more food. So the shift toward a sustainable and regenerative agriculture is absolutely needed. The transformation is absolutely needed at all levels. So what are the adaptation actions that are currently discussed? We talk about some means like reducing the food losses all over the supply chain and the food agriculture chain. Also the shifting diet programs to produce, to enable people to have more sustainable diets and habits is also a means to address that. But according to FAO and many other institutions, the best way is closing the yield gap. What does it mean, the yield gap? The fact that we can produce more food using the same surface and the same piece of land. So when we will be able to address the yield gap, actually, the food production increase can shift from 56% to 113% more food using the same surface, which is far beyond all the other means. For example, reducing food waste will lead to 10% more production. Shifting to new diets and more sustainable diets will at maximum make the shift will definitely impact us with 30% more production. So the close of the yield gap is the best way to enhance the production while getting this equilibrium with the nature and biodiversity needs. So the close of the yield gap is also a way to unlock the potential of the soils as a carbon sink. Today, we always discuss about, when we are addressing the climate change crisis, about the nature-based solutions as a way to reduce carbon and to capture carbon by reforestation, etc. But the soil itself is a way to sequestrate carbon. Today, 2/3 of the carbon in the terrestrial carbon actually is captured in the soils. And the soils contains at least 2 or 3 times the carbon that is measured in the atmosphere. So this is a very interesting nexus, a very reinforcing loop of enhancing the production while enabling the soil to play a major role in the carbon shift and the climate crisis through sequestrating more carbon. And this generates more healthy soils through more enriched soils in carbon, which leads to a better production in terms of yield. So how to achieve this transformation? We need to work with farmers hand in hand on the ground. We need, first of all, to train farmers at the farm level on the sustainable nutrient management practices, how to integrate precision farming agriculture and precision agriculture in their way of doing their daily tasks. Also, we need to work on their affordability, and we need to provide what we call customized products and customized inputs, especially fertilizers, that are based on a science-based way through soil analysis, etc., that enable farmers to use the right nutrients for their right crops in the right time. Finally, I will say that we need to integrate and shift our mindsets from seeing Africa as a continent that needs help to a continent that is part of the solution and a very important means to the global solution to both food crisis and climate change crisis.
No, I fully agree. Thank you very much. I mean, I'm a firm believer that the conversation shouldn't be about how the world can help Africa to address climate change or to address food insecurity, but the other way around, which is how can Africa help the world to address climate change challenges and food insecurity. And what you describe seems to be a win-win solution that certainly would gain to be duplicated and accessed for everybody. But before we come back to that, Valerie, if you allow me, we have been saying, you have said already at the beginning that we need to break silos between climate, food security, conflict. I think we also need to break time silos. And I know it's a challenge, but we need to be able to deal at the same time with short-term emergencies and mid-long-term investment, if only to be able to lessen the short-term emergency. How do you deal with that at the World Food Programme? Because for most of us, World Food Programme is about addressing emergencies, but I understand that you are also working on mid-term and long-term solutions, so thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that question, because WFP's mandate focuses both on emergency food needs and on improving food security. And so that naturally places us working at that nexus of humanitarian development, but also in countries that are facing recurring instability and conflicts. So the peace component comes in. And really climate, I think, is the great connector in that space. We're looking on sort of 3 levels. One is, how do we ensure that we're scaling up the response to climate shocks? And that's, large-scale emergency food and cash transfers that are provided in a climate smart way. And across the UN, we talk about greening the blue, so really looking at low emissions and low contribution to climate in our work. So scaling up some of the work that we do. We also look at protecting communities who are subjected to climate shocks, and this has to do with strengthening early warning, scaling up anticipatory action that provides support to people before the shocks hit based on strong early warning activity so that they can take the actions that they need to take to protect their families and their assets, which also reduces the recovery time. And there's other ways in terms of strengthening national social protection systems that also help protect climate vulnerable populations. But I really wanted to dwell on the third area, which is really about adaptation. And for us, what the focus is about supporting populations who are at risk of shocks and climate undermining their food security to better manage those risks and adapt their livelihoods in the face of these recurring shocks. And these are sort of activities and partnerships that engage in areas like soil and water conservation. And we were just hearing about the importance of really investing in that to improve yields and really get the most out of the land. Restoring damaged ecosystems so that we're putting more back into the soil rather than just taking out of it. Diversifying production towards more nutritious crops is also important for replenishing and supporting land, but also addressing food security. And probably the Sahara and the Sahel is the best example, both of the challenge, areas with, arid, semi-arid lands, degraded soil, poor rainfall, and subjected both to long protracted droughts, but then followed by flash floods and displacement. In these areas, something that we have been doing in partnership is working on an integrated resilience package where we bring these different context-specific interventions together in a way that helps harness water, restore degraded land, and link it to interventions like school meals programs or support for populations to reduce the impact of the lean season. And these kind of activities in the Sahel have already supported 3 million people, rehabilitated and restored 220,000 hectares of degraded land. And what we saw last year in Niger is that 500,000 people in drought-affected areas who had participated in these programs no longer required humanitarian support. They were able to see themselves through the crisis. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about investing in reducing needs. Clearly that takes partnerships, not just partnerships across the nexus, but public and private sector coming together. It takes strong evidence, and this also involves academic institutions helping to come in to really measure the impact of this work in reducing humanitarian need. And it also takes investment across that nexus.
No, I think this is absolutely key. And before I give you the floor on this particular point of what investment, which investment is needed, I just want to stress the point you made on adaptation, which is probably as important, even more important than mitigation for the Global South. And I think that if there is a point to make in the oncoming COP28 debate, is to balance rightly the action and the resources between mitigation and adaptation. For the people, adaptation is absolutely key. So now let me come to you, Pedro. We keep talking about investment and needed resources. What is it going to take to bridge these challenges of food security and climate change? I mean, what level, and I would say what mix of public and private investment is needed, and where should it be targeted in priority, because we all know that resources are limited. And my last question would be about trade. do you think we need to transform world trade, or to some extent at least, in order to achieve both SDG 2 and SDG 13? With a specific point, maybe not to tackle here, but if I take the example of African agriculture, developing African agriculture, the difficulty to do that with the European agriculture norms and package, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Well, the starting point that we have, I was mentioning before, the general SDG investment gap on food and agriculture alone is $273 billion annually. So the starting point that we have and the diagnosis that we have already calls for an urgent need to redress some of this investment, and my colleagues were also saying, to this sector, because it's very important, no? I think that something that is usually overlooked is the investment on food supply chains. Not only on the agriculture sector per se, on the production side, on the storage side, but also on the supply chain, food supply chains, because that includes also, you know, customs modernization, digitalization, port management. So it touches a lot of trade-related areas where investment need to be greener, needs to be more sustainable, and needs to be more resilient. So that is one thing that we are proposing, you know, the investment on food supply chains and all the related networks so that they are built with sustainability and with the resilience. No? And you were saying also about what we need to change, or if trade would need to change. We are not the WTO, we don't regulate, but what we do is trade facilitation. And I think that these past 2 years, there has been the Black Sea Initiative, which has been, you know, a major trade facilitation initiative, granting the access of wheat, grain, and fertilizers. You were saying also the importance of fertilizers. So through this initiative, we ensured the export and an impediment of, you know, a trade of these goods to the global south. We kept the price, the FAO price index down. We managed to get to the countries where otherwise, you know, these goods wouldn't have arrived. So we have proven that with trade facilitation initiatives in many different levels, and of course with the investment needed, they can prove to be a good tool that doesn't need to, you know, to have on the table many negotiators or everybody to be on agreement, but that can actually have an impact on people at the end of the day.
Thank you very much. To you, Anan, who are a practitioner and an African practitioner, how do you react to what has been said? And I would say, how practically can indeed Africa demonstrate its ability to leapfrog and to be indeed a key stakeholder when it comes to addressing climate change and addressing food insecurity? And I would say not only reconciling both, but even going further by piggybacking on each other, by addressing both in a way that makes progress in both climate and food security. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree. And there are many facts that today make us comfortable and even sure that the big potential will come from Africa. When we talk about the yield gap, the food increase of food production that is needed, it's expected in the future this needs to be at least 50% to 60% more food production needed. And it's also expected that the yields will increase by 30%. And the most important is that all this is expected to happen in Africa. Why? Because the potential in Africa is huge. Today, the yield in Africa is 25%, the world average. So we have a potential of 75%. And it's mainly due to the use of fertilizers, because in Africa we use 1/10 of the average used around the world. So how this makes us sure and pretty comfortable with that if we address the systemic issues about bringing the inputs, about unlocking the financial tools, about debottlenecking the supply chain, about the go-to-market, etc. This will definitely lead to a result. And at OCP, we are sure of this because we already experienced that this holistic approach of working all the components of the value chain. So we have been working on the ground in several countries in Africa, hand in hand with farmers, to train them on the use of right fertilizers, to develop the exact fertilizer needed for their crops and their lands. We worked on affordability. We partnered with several financial institutions to bring adapted tools, financial tools, to these farmers. We also worked on logistics sometimes to make sure that we are producing locally, that we have blenders locally, but also that the products coming from the farms has a chance to go to market in the end, because this is also a part of the gap. So this shows how much it's important to have a holistic approach, but also this shows that a work in partnering hand in hand with several institutions is needed. We should definitely be aware that it's not a simple issue to address, and it's not a short-term results, it's a middle-term or long-term results, but we need absolutely to bring all partners around the same objective and to work on the systemic approach to make it happen in the end.
No, I thank you very much, because, I mean, once again, I think this is key, and this came out from our debate. I mean, break the silos approach and make sure that we have a holistic approach to agriculture in general, both in addressing food insecurity or addressing building better food systems. And by the way, I think that the shift of the conversation from food security to food system is key. And the second point is this holistic approach, which means that agriculture, it's not just about farming. It's about transforming, storing, trading, processing, and we need to build the whole, or to work along the whole value chain, which means that somehow maybe the agriculture department in any government should be immediately with the Prime Minister in order to be able to deal with all compartments that are needed. Before I maybe come back to a last round, if needed, I'd like to see whether there are any questions. People have any? I don't see everybody, so no, I think so. That's fine. Maybe I will give you a last famous word to each of you. Valerie, what would be your priority? Because we need also to have priorities. I mean, there's so much to do.
Well, you know, I think the emphasis that I would just like to leave is that we need to be seeing, you know, more political will and an investment in what works, and what works for populations who are living in the most fragile, degraded context. I think that's where we need to see more partnership, more investment, more engagement with a people-focused effort. And when we talk about resilience, when we talk about adaptation, that's what we're really talking about, investing in people and their future.
Okay, thank you very much. Pedro?
I mean, being at the Paris Peace Forum, which is all about cooperation, engagement, multi-stakeholder, I think that we need to, go back to your first point, Natalie, about breaking silos and not talking sector by sector, but really bringing all the actors together, all the stakeholders together, and try to find solutions with the right set of concrete actions that are fundable, that can be financed, and bring quick solutions more than declarations and statements and just political will. We have to move from the will to the action, and I think forum like this is a proof of what can be done, and also the level of the discussion and the different sectors that can be cross-cutting all the discussions and the solutions proposed.
Thank you. Aman?
I would like to say that, emphasize again that Africa is part of the global solution. and that there are no silos between the SDGs. If we want to address the food security issue, this will definitely also address the climate issue. And one of the SDGs is partnering for goals. It's absolutely a cycle that is needed to achieve all that. So, and Africa is a good case. So a multi-stakeholder approach is definitely needed to make Africa the center of these two global discussions, food security and climate.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So basically what you are saying is not Africa is a good case, but Africa could be a model. And yeah, I think that's, I mean, I share that conclusion, definitely. So I think that we can get from this, if there is no other questions, from this debate, the need to break silos. And by the way, I think that silo is an agricultural word, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a good opportunity to do that. The fact that agriculture doesn't equal poverty, which is something that has been a very long time been one of the main ideas of the development experts. You need to leave agricultural sector to develop and go towards industrial and services. And in fact, it's the same. So make agriculture a business case. That food insecurity and climate are definitely linked, as they are linked with conflicts and crises. So, and that we need investment. But we won't have investment if we won't make the case to invest. So I think that we must all join forces at bilateral and multilateral levels, civil society, government, institutions, academicians, to push that case forward. So I think we can give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you very much. Ah, j'ai été trop vite. Pardon.